Hey guys, welcome to your first IB Biology video lecture. We're going to be starting with the topic of cells, and specifically today we'll be beginning our topic of cell theory. So basically this is going to be an introduction to all that we'll be learning later, some of the history of cells, how we know what we know, and like I said, we'll be getting into specifics later. So to begin, the image that you're looking at right now on the screen is an image of cork cells. Robert Hooke was one of the first people to discover cells because he also invented the microscope. And when he saw this image, he thought that they looked like little jail cells, and so coined the term cell, which we now use, as you know, to describe the smallest unit of life. So, our first assessment statement is to outline the cell theory, and the cell theory is basically information that describes what we know about cells. There are 5 parts to it, and I'll discuss those in just a moment. And our second assessment statement, which we'll cover simultaneously, is to discuss the evidence for this cell theory. Originally, there were 3 parts to the cell theory, and these first 3 are the most important for you to remember. And today, with increased technology, we can add 2 more. So just starting at the beginning, living organisms are composed of cells is our first part of the cell theory. And basically what this means is that if something is living, it is composed of cells. There has been nothing else living found made of anything else. And our evidence for this is observations made with microscopes and other technology. We found, like I said, anything that's living is composed of cells, or at least a cell. The second part of the original cell theory are that cells are the smallest unit of life. So nothing smaller than a cell or simpler than a cell can be living on its own. Evidence for this, there's 2 pieces of evidence. Number 1 is that the discovery that a virus is non-cellular and non-living outside of a host. A virus is composed of protein, DNA, and fat, and is not going to be living without the help of a host. And then the second piece of evidence is studies done on organelles. And organelles are basically the organs or the smaller parts of a cell. And we found that they are not capable of living outside of the cell. So they've been removed, kept in controlled environments, and still are not able to survive. So cells are the smallest unit of life. Lastly, for our original cell theory, we find that cells come from pre-existing cells. And this is kind of a crazy one. Back in the day, they used to think that cells came from something called spontaneous generation. So basically, life would just appear, or a new cell would just appear. But due to some different observations and studying, we find that they do come from pre-existing cells by something called cell division. Evidence for this comes from, number 1, observation of cell division. So using a microscope, we're able to watch cells actively divide and form new cells. And also a man named Louis Pasteur made some observations about spontaneous generation. What he did was basically put some nutrient broth in a flask that was covered, and he found that no life formed within that covered flask. Whereas if he left a flask of nutrient broth uncovered, it would be teeming with life after a couple of days. So that led him to the hypothesis that cells did come from pre-existing cells, and that spontaneous generation was not a viable option. Today we can add 2 additional parts to this theory because we have more and better technology. Number 4 is that cells contain information that dictates their growth, development, and behavior. What this means is basically cells contain DNA or genes that dictate their characteristics, physical, their behavior, etc. And we've been able to observe the chromosomes and observe how they're used and how they're expressed. Also, we've been able to do experiments that affect genes, how they're used and transferred through genetic engineering. And lastly, we see that cells are the site of all chemical reactions of life. And basically, to sum this up, that is our metabolism. And metabolism is processing nutrients, forming different proteins and chemicals that we need for life. Evidence for this is the discovery of enzymes. Enzymes are produced by the body and used in several different reactions that we'll see later, including respiration and fermentation. Also, we have the discovery of several biochemical events that happen within the cells, such as photosynthesis and cell respiration, and the presence of discrete organelles, and then biochemical events that happen within them. So cells contain these organelles that allow all of these reactions to occur. Okay, so we've got this cell theory with 5 parts. Basically, the cell theory began to be formed in 1662 when Robert Hooke first invented the microscope and observed the cells of the cork, like I talked about. And through the years, the theory grew and became more detailed and had more information. And in 1862, so 200 years later, that is when Louis Pasteur did his experiment to find that life does not spontaneously generate. So for our discussion tomorrow, I want you to think about, why did it take so long to get all of these steps? What are some events in history that may have interrupted some of our knowledge here? Also, you'll see on the screen that we need to discuss what is the nature of a scientific theory. So take a moment and read the comments below and be ready to discuss this topic tomorrow. Have a great night. Thanks.